The first thing you hear is the Detroit two-stroke screaming through twin chrome stacks, climbing through the gears. For 25 years, this was the shape of American long haul, a flat-faced cabover sitting on top of its own engine. In 1986, Kenworth quietly killed it. The K100 didn't lose to a better truck. It lost to a single paragraph of federal law. In 1956, President Eisenhower signed the Federal Aid Highway Act, authorizing 41,000 miles of new interstate. The country was about to start moving on diesel, but there was a catch. State laws capped the total length of a tractor-trailer combination at 55 feet in much of the country, 60 in some states, and the trailer was where the money lived. A conventional truck, with its long hood out front to house the engine, was hauling 6 feet of cast iron and sheet metal that wasn't earning a dime. For a shipper paying by the mile, 6 feet of trailer that didn't exist was 6 feet of revenue that didn't exist. The math was unforgiving. So the fix was a truck without a hood at all. The idea was older than the interstates. Before the war, American manufacturers had been experimenting with putting the driver on top of the engine instead of behind it. By the 1950s, the White 3000 and the early Freightliner cabovers were already shouldering the freight burden out west, clawing back every inch the conventional gave away. Peterbilt, Mack, and International were building their own versions. They all looked like a refrigerator with wheels, and they all earned their keep at the loading dock. Kenworth had been making cabovers since the 1930s, but by the late 1950s, the company's Seattle engineers were looking at a market that was changing faster than their existing models could keep up with. The interstates were getting longer, the trailers were getting longer, and the states were tightening enforcement of length laws. Carriers needed a cabover designed for the new highway era. The old Kenworth COE was a holdover from the Depression, and everyone in the office knew it. So Kenworth started drawing. What came off that drawing board in 1961 would dominate American long haul for the next 25 years. But the same length laws that made the K100 inevitable would, 2 decades later, make it obsolete. The first K100 rolled out of the Seattle plant in 1961, the same year Kenworth launched the W900 conventional. 2 trucks, same factory, same year, built for 2 different visions of what an American highway truck should be. The W900 was the romance, the K100 was the math. The K stood for Kent. Harry Kent, one of the 2 men whose names made up the company back in 1923. Strip the bodywork off the K100, and you find a brutally simple idea. The cab is a steel box sitting on top of the engine. The engine sits between the frame rails. The driver climbs a set of fold-out steps and drops into a seat positioned directly over the front axle, eyes about 8 feet off the pavement. From that seat, the road comes at you with nothing in front of it. No hood, no fender, no warning. To get to the engine, the whole cab tilts forward on hydraulic rams, rearing up like a horse and exposing the diesel underneath. Once it was up, a mechanic could walk straight in and lay hands on a Cummins NTC, a Detroit Diesel 6 V71, or later a Cat 3406. The engine choices were left to the buyer, because Kenworth understood that an owner-operator's relationship with his engine was personal. The transmission was usually a Fuller Road Ranger, 13-speed standard, 15 or 18 available for heavy haul. Owner-operators argued for hours over which gear count was right for their run. The frame was bolted together rather than welded. The doors hung on full-length piano hinges, and the cab itself was riveted aluminum on a steel substructure to keep weight down. Every choice on that truck was made by men who knew the difference between a spec sheet and a load that had to be on the dock by Tuesday. The K100C arrived in 1968 with a bigger windshield, integrated marker lights, and a redesigned roof. But the upgrade that defined the truck came 8 years later, the Aerodyne Sleeper. Up to that point, sleeper cabs were flat-roofed coffins. A driver couldn't stand up inside one. He sat. He laid down. That was it. The Aerodyne raised the roof, added a second bunk overhead, and gave a 6-foot driver enough headroom to dress himself with his boots on. It was the first factory-raised roof sleeper in the American trucking industry. Every condo cab built in the 40 years since owes its existence to that one Kenworth decision. And then, there was the sound. With unmuffled stacks, the Detroit two-stroke howled at a pitch that bent the air around it. Truckers called it the Detroit Scream, and you could hear a loaded K100 climbing a grade from 2 miles away. By 1976, Kenworth had the truck dialed in. Flat face, Detroit Scream, walk-up sleeper, owner-operator engine choice. The K100 was ready to own the interstate, and for the next 10 years, it did. By the late 1970s, the K100 had become the cabover that defined American long haul. Drive any stretch of interstate in 1978, and you'd see them lined up at every truck stop from Barstow to Bethlehem. Consolidated Freightways, Yellow Freight, PIE nationwide, Roadway. The big LTL carriers ran fleets of K100s because the math from 1961 still worked. Length laws hadn't moved. Every cabover meant another 6 feet of paying freight. But the owner-operators were where the K100 became a culture. These were men who put their entire net worth into a single truck. They financed it for 6 years, painted it themselves, named it, and lived in it 300 nights a year. A new K100 Aerodyne in the late 1970s cost more than most American houses. Owning one meant betting your future on the highway, so they made the truck their own. Chrome was the language. Bumpers got polished until they hurt to look at. Stack covers got engraved. Air horns stood off the roof in chrome-plated pairs. Sun visors got cut into points and trimmed in stainless. Mud flaps carried hand-painted scenes. Eagles, naked women, the silhouette of a wife waiting at home. Every K100 on the road was a rolling autobiography. The trucks ran on CB radio. Channel 19 was the long-haul party line. And a K100 driver with a good handle and a clean reputation could talk his way across 3 time zones without seeing a single highway patrol. When C.W. McCall's Convoy hit number 1 in January of 1976, the CB radio became the most romantic piece of consumer electronics in America. By the end of that year, the Aerodyne had launched, and Hollywood was about to give America its first major movie about a long-haul outlaw with a CB handle. The K100 became the truck the cameras pointed at when America wanted to see what a long-haul rig should look like. For a working driver, the appeal was practical. The Aerodyne sleeper meant a man could stand up and change his shirt without crawling outside in the rain. The flat face meant he could see the road 3 car lengths closer than any conventional could offer. Twin saddle tanks under the cab gave him close to 1,000 miles between fill-ups on a good run. And when something broke, he tilted the cab, climbed down on the engine, and fixed it himself in a truck stop parking lot at 2 in the morning. Coming down a grade, the K100 sang. The Jake brake on a Cummins NTC let out a deep, hammering bark that rolled down the canyon walls and announced the truck's arrival before it ever came into view. Old-timers learned to read the Jake. They could tell you what brand of engine was inside a cabover from a quarter mile away, with their eyes closed. By 1980, the K100 had become highway royalty. It owned the long-haul corridors. It owned the truck stops. It owned the magazine covers. Overdrive magazine put a K100 Aerodyne on its cover. So often the editors started joking they should just license the silhouette. But the empire was already running on borrowed time. In 1980, a former actor named Ronald Reagan was elected president. Within 2 years, his administration would sign the law that took the K100's reason for existing and walked away from it. The Surface Transportation Assistance Act of 1982 was signed by Ronald Reagan on January 6, 1983. Inside, it was a paragraph that ran fewer than 100 words. That paragraph killed the K100. The provision did something the trucking industry had been lobbying for since the 1960s. It told the states they could no longer regulate the overall length of a tractor-trailer combination on the interstate highway system. The federal government was taking that authority back. From now on, the only thing the states could regulate was trailer length, and that was set at a minimum of 48 feet, with a 53-foot ceiling phased in over the following years. The math from 1961 broke in a single afternoon. For 22 years, the K100 had earned its existence on one principle. Every foot of tractor was a foot of trailer lost, and every foot of trailer lost was revenue lost. The cabover existed because the conventional was a tax on freight. After the STAA passed, that tax disappeared. A long-nosed Kenworth W900 could now pull a 53-foot trailer without bumping the legal length limit. So could a Peterbilt 359, so could a Freightliner FLC. The penalty the conventional had paid for its hood was gone, and the conventional had advantages the cabover couldn't match. Ride quality was the first one. A driver in a K100 sat directly over the front axle. Every expansion joint, Every pothole, every concrete seam came up through the steering column and into his spine. A conventional driver sat 10 feet back, behind the front axle, riding on the suspension instead of leading it. After 300 miles, the difference was something a man felt in his lower back for a week. Engine heat was the second. A K100's diesel lived under the cab, which meant the cab floor was the engine cover. In July, in Arizona, with a Cummins NTC working hard up a grade, the K100's interior could climb past 120 degrees. A conventional driver had 6 feet of hood between himself and the engine. He stayed cool. Service access cut both ways. Yes, the cab tilted forward for engine work, but it tilted forward on hydraulic rams that broke. The cab's seals leaked. The wiring harnesses that crossed the hinge point fatigued from thousands of tilts over a truck's lifetime. A conventional truck had a hood that flipped on a single pivot, and behind that hood was an engine bay a mechanic could walk around without acrobatics. Aerodynamics were the third nail. By the early 1980s, fuel prices had hit levels that made every truck buyer recalculate. A flat-faced cabover pushed a wall of air at 65 miles per hour. The fuel penalty was real, and it was measurable. Kenworth's own engineers had been working the problem since 1979. The answer came in 1985. Kenworth released the T600. It was an aerodynamic conventional with a sloped hood, a setback front axle, and a windshield raked back at an angle no American truck had ever worn. Drivers and dealers nicknamed it the Anteater. The first time one rolled into a truck stop, the regulars at the counter laughed at it. 6 months later, they were ordering them. The T600 delivered double-digit fuel economy gains over the K100 on a typical long-haul run. For a fleet running 1,000 trucks, that translated to millions of dollars a year. Fleets pivoted within 12 months. Consolidated Freightways, Yellow Freight, Roadway, all the carriers that had built their entire long-haul operations on K100s started phasing them out. The owner-operators followed. By 1985, a new K100 on a dealer lot was sitting next to a T600, and the T600 was being signed for by every fleet manager who could read a fuel report. In 1986, Kenworth quietly ended U.S. production of the K100. There was no farewell tour, no final edition badges, no magazine spread. The last American K100 rolled off the Seattle line. The doors closed behind it, and that was the end. The truck didn't fail. The world it was built for stopped existing. What died in 1986 was an entire philosophy of what a long-haul truck could be. The K100 was honest in a way modern trucks aren't. You sat over the front axle, and you felt the road as it actually was. You climbed 3 feet of ladder to get to your seat, and that climb told you every morning that you were going to work, not commuting. There was nothing between you and the road, and nothing between you and the freight you were paid to move. Modern American trucks hide the work. Sloped hoods, aerodynamic skirts, sealed cabs with computer-controlled climate, sound deadening that reduces a Cummins to a polite hum. Better in every measurable way. Quieter, smoother, more fuel efficient, and further from the road than any K100 driver would have understood. Europe still runs cabovers. So does Australia, and Japan, and most of South America. Their length laws never changed the way America's did. In Amsterdam and Sydney and Tokyo, cabovers still make sense because the cities are old and the streets are narrow, and the math from 1961 still works. A European driver climbing into a Mercedes Actros or a Scania R-Series is having an experience an American long-haul driver hasn't had since the Reagan administration. The American cabover went away because America rewrote the rules of the highway, and the truck that had been built to win the old game found itself playing a new one it could never win. The K100 was the last truck that asked the driver to be part of the machine. Everything that came after asked the driver to sit inside it. That's the difference. And once it's gone, it doesn't come back. Walk into a logging operation in the Pacific Northwest today, and you'll still find K100s working for a living. Heavy haul outfits in Australia run them every day. There are owner-operators in Canada who bought their K100 new in 1984 and still drive it on a regular route. The trucks simply outlived the law that gave them their reason for being. The collector community keeps the American ones alive. The American Truck Historical Society holds shows where K100 Aerodynes pull in by the dozen, restored back to factory chrome, owners standing next to them with their arms crossed, and their grandkids climbing the ladder up to the cab. There are restoration shops in Tennessee and Oregon that specialize in nothing else. There's a registry of every surviving Aerodyne the community can track down. A machine isn't killed by failure. It's killed by the world, moving its goalposts. And somewhere tonight, on a logging road in Oregon, a Detroit two-stroke is screaming through twin chrome stacks, climbing through the gears, and the cab is rocking forward into the night. If you've ever climbed into one of these, leave the year and the engine in the comments. The cabover may be gone from the American highway, but the people who drove them are still out here. And there are more American machines worth remembering. Subscribe, and we'll keep telling their stories.